Have you ever pulled off the highway, told yourself just one room, and felt a cold tickle of regret the second the keycard slid into your hand? Tonight, I'm going to tell you 3 true motel nightmares that will keep you double-checking the locks the next time you travel late. These aren't urban legends or dramatized creepypasta. They're real first-person nights when people slept, or tried to. And something about the motel made everything fragile. Thin walls, parking lot doors, and strangers who didn't know where to stop. Motels, by design, lower the threshold between public and private. Your room opens onto a parking lot. The people you pass in the fluorescent lobby are the same people who can be staring at your door minutes later. That's the setup. Each story here escalates. Small weirdness, then persistent boundary testing, then that gut-sickening peak where you realize you're not just uneasy anymore. If you've ever driven through the night, this will hit home. If you haven't, imagine the highway hum, a coffee gone cold, and a keycard that suddenly feels like a flimsy promise. Story 1. Virginia. Solo, exhausted, and not alone. I was driving from New York down to Tennessee, alone, trying to get in a few extra hours of road before work the next day. It was one of those trips you do because you have to. Eyes heavy, caffeine ineffective, the kind of tired where your head wants the pillow before your body does. I'd just passed Richmond, and it was after 1 in the morning when I pulled off at the first tired-looking motel I saw. 2 stories. A neon sign that flickered on and off like a heartbeat, the parking lot still enough that my headlights sounded louder than they should. I remember thinking, at least it's cheap. The room smelled like stale air freshener and something metallic under the HVAC vent. The AC rattled in a rhythm that wouldn't settle. I kept the TV low. The static was somehow less lonely than silence, and I set my alarm for 5. I was so tired, I almost left my shoes on. I remember that detail because it makes the whole scene more ordinary, more banal, and that's the thing that chilled me later. Nothing cinematic had happened yet. Just a beat-up room and a guy who needed sleep. Around 1:30, something started through the wall. At first I thought a couple was arguing next door. Thin motel walls make those private noises public. I've heard fights before, the muffled shouts and slammed doors, but this was different. It sounded like someone was doing voices, not 2 people, but one person switching tones, like he was trying on different arguments. A deep voice said something I couldn't catch, then a higher simulative voice answered. He was mimicking both sides. It was eerie. At one point the voice whispered, as if leaning into the crack in the wall, "Come out, come out!" Then a louder, mock-indignant voice replied from the same direction. I pressed my ear to the wall at one point, and there was that faint smell again, cigarette smoke mixed with something sweet, like dryer sheets. The AC rumbled. The voices kept sliding between accents and pitches. Whoever it was performing, trying to get a reaction, testing the barrier of the wall. I tried to reason it away. Maybe he was on the phone. Maybe he was drunk and talking to himself. But there was a cadence there that didn't fit a normal phone call. He was changing characters to see if anyone would answer. Then came the knocking. A slow, deliberate knock on the wall that lined up with the front door. Not a thump or a banging. A measured, polite knock that said, "I'm here, I'm right here," without ever saying it. I froze. My first thought was lock the deadbolt. I clicked it like you click a child's seatbelt because motion calmed me. The knock came again, a single rap that matched the rhythm of my heart for a minute. A voice, softer now, from the wall. "I hear you in there." That line sent a cold electricity through me. I wanted to stand up, go to the door, flip the peephole open and see a face. I stayed sitting because adrenaline makes you both want to move and impossible to move. The voice kept trying different tones, like a performer getting louder when the crowd doesn't respond. I could hear the scrunch of someone shifting their weight on the other side of the concrete. The AC clanked. The television murmured in the corner. At some point the knocking stopped. Silence moved into the room like a weight. I had my phone in my hand. I considered calling the front desk. I held it to my ear for the longest time and then closed my hand around it, unable to bring myself to speak. I told myself the desk would be closed, that the woman at check-in was probably an older lady who had been awake too long and wouldn't believe an exhausted man at 2 a.m. Besides, I had no proof. All I had was the impression of voices and a knock that could be chalked up to something else. Then someone started at the window. I remember the sound of the blinds scraping together before I saw him. The slats shifted, a thin strip of light moved, and a face, not immediately a face, more of a shape, pressed to the glass. He didn't just look. He made small faces like someone making expressions behind a mirror to see which got a reaction. He leaned his forehead against the pane and tilted his head the way children do when they're testing if someone is paying attention. He was close enough that I could see the oil on his skin under the parking lot light. He began to change voices, right up against the glass, making that same two-voice act, softer now, speaking as if the window and the wall were part of the same theater. In the moment, everything collapses into short sentences. I am at the window. He presses his face to the glass. He is performing. I am paralyzed. I flipped the deadbolt, shoved my dresser against the door out of some primitive instinct, and dialed the front desk. My voice was rough. "There's someone at my window," I said. He's right here." There was a pause on the other end, a brusque shuffling. Then a voice asked me my room number. I told her. I could hear keys jingling in the background, the kind of casual motion that makes you more relieved. Someone is awake, and then less relieved, because it could also mean someone is slow to get out to check. She told me someone was being escorted. She told me she'd move me to a room next to the office. I didn't ask why. I didn't want to hear "he's not here" or "we can't find him." I took the change of room like a gift. I grabbed my things and walked past the parking lot. The man was gone from my window when I pushed the sliding glass door and stepped into the cool night. There was no aftermath puddle, no note, no mark on the glass. Someone at the office had a grip on him, or he had melted into the night. I had the ridiculous thought that he had been playing all of it, the voices, the knocks, because he could. It felt absurd that someone would spend an hour sounding like an argument only to vanish without explanation. The clerk had me sign a new card and pointed me to a room on the ground level, close to the office. "You'll sleep better," she said. She looked tired, like she'd been in the job too long, but she sounded almost sincere. The new room was quieter, though the AC still rattled. I didn't sleep well. At around 4, I thought I heard footsteps outside my door, slow pacing from the direction of the parking lot, and then again, after dawn, the same step that made my stomach turn. I didn't wait to find out if it was the same man. I left before sunrise. I didn't return the key to the drop box. I drove away feeling like I'd survived a test I hadn't known I was taking. It's the little details that linger. The way he used voices like props, how normal everything else was, and how a motel window turned into a stage for someone else's weird performance. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know if he was lonely, drunk, bored, or dangerous. All I know is that a person can be alone in a room and feel watched in a way that most public places do not create. If that first story has your stomach in your throat, stick around. I've got 2 more that get worse. If you're into real scary stories like these, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. I've got a whole collection. Now, don't click away. The next one is a family trip that goes sideways fast, and it's one of those moments where you realize how quickly a safe routine can collapse. Story 2, Branson, a family trip, a stepmom who refuses to back down, and a quick exit. I was the kid in the back seat of a family road trip. College just started, and we were driving to see a show in Branson. The van was full in that way family vans get, backpacks, a cooler, a map that nobody was using because everyone had phones. We decided to stop for the night around 10. The motel, lit like a cheap stage, had a small lobby and a woman behind the desk who was folding towels. As we checked in, my mom and stepmom and brother were talking loud enough that we didn't even think to lower our voices. We handed over a credit card, they read the room number aloud, and that should have been the end of it. But there was a man sitting in a dark corner of that lobby. He had on a jacket too heavy for the weather, and a cigarette that he wasn't smoking but was holding like a prop. He watched us from the shadow, not moving when we came in, his eyes tracking the sound of our voices. Because we were a family, things were casual and loud. My stepmom in particular was the type who didn't like secrecy. She announced our room number the way people announce a joke. I could see the man's neck tense when she said it. That detail stuck with me, butterflies in his neck like something had been planted. We went up to our second-floor room with the sliding door that opened onto the walkway. The motel's light cast long, thin shadows across the concrete. We settled in. The kids passed around a bag of chips, and the adults unpacked like everyone in the world knew it would be fine. At some point, my stepmom got up to take the trash out. She opened the door and stepped onto the walkway. I watched because nothing good ever happens when you don't. That man from the lobby was standing a few doors down when she opened ours. He blended into the walkway darkness, a silhouette with no hurry. He was close enough that I could see him move his hands into the pockets of his jacket. When my stepmom went back inside, he didn't leave. Instead, he walked quietly up to the adjoining room's door, the one that was attached to our room, and stood there like a neighbor waiting for a knock. We were loud enough to hear his shoes scrape. Then, without any fanfare, he slipped into the next room when the door opened. My stepmom had opened it to put the trash in the hallway, and he took that moment like an invitation. He didn't push, didn't shove. He just moved in like he belonged there. The way he crossed the threshold, unhurried and calm, is what made my stepmom's jaw clench. She came back into our room and told us what she'd seen. She didn't raise her voice. She just put her hand on the counter and said, "That man walked right into the room next to us." We were annoyed more than scared at first. The reflex people have to blame themselves for being conspicuous. My stepmom, though, got up and walked to the door. She knocked on the neighboring door and asked the man who came out what he was doing. He answered calmly, like he'd entered the room to use the bathroom or to sleep. It didn't feel correct. She demanded a refund. She said she wasn't going to let him sit near our kids. That sentence, "I'm not going to let him sit near our kids," is one of those small, decisive things that changes the direction of an evening. The motel clerk came from the desk, a man in a button-up shirt with tired eyes. He listened to my stepmom, and after a short exchange handed back our money without much fuss. He said something about safety, and found us another room across town. My stepmom wasn't satisfied with a shrug. She wanted us out now. We packed quickly and went outside. This is where the part of the night that felt like a movie started to edge towards real danger. As we loaded the van, I noticed 3 men gathered near a dark sedan a few spaces away. They stood in a loose triangle and spoke in low voices. I saw one of them glance toward our vehicle. He took a step that looked like he was going to lean inside and check the doors. For a second, one of them walked with purposeful steps toward our car and reached for a handle, the kind of reach people make when they have a plan that doesn't include consent. My dad got in, started the engine, and we weren't going to be cautious. We bolted. One of the men banged on the hood as we pulled away. Car horns, my mum shouting at my stepmom to look ahead, the van fishtailing. It's all a blur until you're past the light of the parking lot and your heart won't stop pounding. I remember the taste of dust in the air and the sick relief when the highway swallowed us. We didn't stop for coffee. We found a different motel down the road that smelled of roaches and stale hairspray, and for whatever reason, we picked the roaches over people in the parking lot. The clerk there took our money and didn't ask questions. Later we learned that convenient proximity can be dangerous. Saying a room number out loud in a lobby is a small, stupid thing, but in a setting where every stranger could be a stranger who notices, it felt suddenly foolish. The men near our car never did anything beyond leaning and knocking at our hood, and maybe that's the worst part. There are a lot of things that seem like a step away from much worse, and you don't know which step they might take. My stepmom still talks about that night as if she sees it in slow motion. The man in the corner who didn't move, the way he drifted into another room like it was his right, and the 3 men who congregated like vultures. She still tests the locks on rental cars. She still counts heads before a family walks across a parking lot. I tell the story now because it shows how quickly an otherwise ordinary road trip can become a night where you question every decision. If that one made you breathe a little faster, good. The last story is the quiet kind of fear that breathes in the spaces between sentences. The man who stared and kept staring until you realize that staring itself is a plan. Story 3. Florida. A couple, a trench coat, and the stare that never breaks. This one was supposed to be romantic. A long drive down to Florida, a cheap coastal motel, 2 people tired and joking in the car about the worst possible outcomes. We pulled off the interstate and checked in late. The motel looked like most motels. Cheap landscaping, a saline pool with no swimmers, and a parking lot where every door opens directly to the asphalt. We booked a room on the 2nd row back from the office, thinking it would be quieter. After we checked in, I realized my charger was in the trunk. I walked back to the car, leaving the door cracked because the key was inside the ignition and I planned to be gone for 30 seconds. It's the little things you never think about until something goes wrong. I bent into the front seat, rummaged for the cable, and when I looked up there was a man standing in front of our door. He was large and wearing a trench coat, a heavy, dark thing that looked wrong for the humidity. He didn't have a cigarette or a cup or a bag. He just stood there, hands hanging at his sides, his face in shadow. The way he was angled made me think he was waiting for someone, but the waiting had an intensity that didn't read as casual. He was there as if the door was his target. I could feel the hair on my neck prick. He didn't knock, he didn't fumble, he just stared, not glancing, not checking a phone, a sustained stare, like a person reading a line of print until it becomes a pattern. For long minutes, he didn't move. The parking lot lights buzzed. My car's door was open a little wider, and the cable was in my hand. My brain did that weird split, one part cataloguing details, another part wanting to run. I woke my partner, whispering her name. She lifted her head, squinted through the darkness. I pointed without saying anything because words make things more real. She saw him and her face tightened. The man didn't flinch. He just continued to face our door, unmoving. He was a statue that breathed. For a second I entertained the stupid hope that he was a famous actor doing some performance art, or a local man with problems, or a security guard oddly positioned. But that hope was a small, desperate thing. He then turned and moved across the parking lot. He didn't hurry, he didn't glance back. He walked slowly and stopped across from us, still looking in our direction, still focused like a person examining a painting. When he reached the far side of the lot, he stood with his hands in the pockets of his coat and simply watched. The front desk clerk, who'd been leaning over a ledger like it didn't matter, was now peering through the lobby glass at him. We went inside, and the clerk gave us a blank look. "We don't have any cameras," he told us after a moment, which was the kind of sentence that makes the skin on your arms ripple. "No cameras," he repeated, as if that was an explanation. He said there were few other guests that night. He shrugged like it was a bad coincidence and not something to be alarmed about. We packed up and left within minutes. The man remained across the lot as we pulled away, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror to catch a silhouette against the motel's sagging lights. Later that week we tried to rationalize. Maybe he was homeless. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he had wandered off from somewhere. But even those explanations felt like paper thin. It was the stare that made the difference. Staring is a predatory practice in a way we don't like to admit. It tests, it probes, it tries to strip away your sense of privacy until you feel exposed. The clerk's statement, "We don't have cameras," is the detail I keep thinking about. At face value, it's plausible. But the idea that a motel with glass doors and car-facing rooms would have zero surveillance is what made us feel oddly naked. Who was watching him while he watched us? The thought that no one was watching him was almost worse. It meant he had all the time in the world to stand there without consequence. The motel smelled like old sunscreen and something musty. We left the charger on the counter. We left late, the charge of the phone forgotten, the unsaid tension thick between us like fabric. We chose an imperfect motel the next time, the kind where the carpet is wrong and the front desk is suspiciously helpful. We chose roaches over a man who knew where we were going to be. Synthesis: what these nights share and what you can't forget. There's a pattern that threads through these three stories. The architecture of motels makes strangers intimate. Parking lot doors mean that anyone can approach your room without walking down a hallway or ringing a bell in a residential foyer. Thin walls make private noises public and public beacons private. People with time and intent, or people who don't recognize the limits of other people's space, can push at the seams that you assume exist. None of these accounts includes a confession of what the strangers would have actually done. I'm not going to tell you that any of those men were going to commit a particular act. That would be speculation. What I will tell you is what it felt like to be on the receiving end of that behavior, watched, tested, and suddenly very small. That sense of vulnerability is the same whether a man is performing voices at your window, slipping into an adjoining room, or simply staring until you can't stand it anymore. You'll notice how often motel staff show up as ambiguous figures in these stories. In the first tale, the desk clerk moved the guest and switched rooms. In the second, the clerk refunded the family and helped them leave. In the third, the clerk told the couple there were no cameras, a detail that felt unhelpful more than reassuring. Motel employees are people too. Sometimes they help, sometimes they shrug, sometimes they are the only line of defense between you and someone else's behavior. None of that absolves management of responsibility, but it does complicate the picture. Sometimes the solution is human intervention, sometimes it's simply leaving. There's also a common thread in how the victims responded. It's never cinematic. They don't have time to compose plans. They make small, instinctive choices. Lock the deadbolt, call the desk, move rooms, pack up, and leave. Escape is messy and pragmatic. People end up picking the lesser evil, staying in a roach-filled room instead of confronting a stranger. Because decision-making at night is about getting yourself and your people out intact. That's not cowardice, it's survival. If there's a lesson here that isn't police advice or tactical how-to, it's this: motel environments can amplify the small, weird behaviors into something that feels threatening. Pay attention to the small signs. Someone performing to get your attention. A person lingering near doors without purpose. People watching longer than seems reasonable. Those are the friction points where unease escalates into fear. One last thing I want to leave you with is how these nights stay with you. You don't forget the performance at the window, the quiet man who walked into an adjoining room, or the trench coat across the lot. They become little triggers, a particular scrape of blinds, the buzz of a motel AC, the way a shadow can look like a body. They change how you travel. Maybe you pick well-lit hotels. Maybe you say room numbers quietly. Maybe you choose rooms near office lights. Maybe you don't change anything at all because you need to be on the road. If you've stayed at a motel and something creepy happened, tell it in the comments. Share it so other people can learn what to watch for, or so we can all remind each other that none of us are as alone as we thought when the world gets quiet. Subscribe for more true-life horror. I'm compiling more motel stories and other late-night encounters from people who were in the wrong place at the wrong hour. We talk about the small, nagging things that make a night into a memory you don't want to relive. These are real. These are true motel nights you don't forget. They haunt the edges of your memory not because anything dramatic happened, but because the ordinary can become dangerous without warning. Keep your eyes open, trust your gut, and remember, sometimes the safest thing is to leave.